In that message, a little bit of it I'd like to you to play now. The President talks about the 7 who were on the shuttle.
We mourn 7 heroes: Michael Smith, Dick Scobee, Judith Resnik, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, and Christa McAuliffe. We mourn their loss as a nation together. The families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us.
At one point today, the President was asked if it might have been a mistake sending a private citizen, Christa McAuliffe, the teacher, up into space. He said, no, this is what the space program is all about. It is the last frontier and the most important one. And in his remarks to the nation, he said, we'll continue because nothing ends here, and the space program goes on. Lou?
Charles, it sounds like what happened at the White House is what happened in living rooms all across the country this morning. It's sort of a growing sense of shock, because earlier on Larry Speaks had indicated that perhaps the State of the Union address tonight would go on.
Indeed, Lou, that's very much what the setting was here. In fact, a number of us were gathered in the Roosevelt Room at the White House for a briefing with White House officials and the President himself on the State of the Union address this evening, that which had been scheduled. Shortly before the President was to come in, an aide came in with a note which said that the shuttle has exploded. We were all quite taken with shock by that. The meeting broke up immediately at that point as everyone rushed to find out what was going on. We got back together a few minutes later. We were told that the President had been in the Oval Office when the word was brought to him by Vice President Bush and National Security Advisor John Poindexter. He went immediately into the adjoining study where there's a television set. He watched the replay there in what was described as stunned silence. And then later on, when we did have a chance to talk with him, it was clear that the shock was on the President's face, and very much that the shock had cut him very deeply, that he felt a sense of attachment to this program, surely, as everyone has. There's been sort of a routine nature to American space launches, 56 or so of them having gone off perfectly, a number which the President himself cited when we talked with him. He said we had gotten so used to it that we are shocked because this has happened after such an extraordinarily safe record. And it really sunk in, and over time the realization and all the people I've talked with put it in very much this sense that there was a feeling that it would be inappropriate, that it was not the time to go to Capitol Hill and address the nation in the form of the State of the Union address, but rather to share this tragedy and let America reflect on what has happened today.
Charles BIERBAUER at the White House, thank you. And the same feeling seemed to be going on Capitol Hill, where work stopped abruptly today as news of the loss of the shuttle Challenger reached members of Congress. 3 of those members have personal knowledge of what it's like to fly in space. Representative Bill Nelson, a Florida Democrat, and Senator Jake Garn, a Utah Republican, both went up as part of the Space Shuttle program and their involvement with it. Senator John Glenn was a member of the original Mercury astronaut team. All 3 of the congressmen drew on their personal experiences in reacting to today's tragedy.
Our sympathy goes out to the families of these 7 brave people. I had the pleasure of being with them over the weekend, and I know of the great warmth that my wife and I have for them, and our deep sympathy for all of this group.
In a moment, we're going to go to the Johnson Space Center for more information. We've heard from the Kennedy Space Center within the past hour. We'll be reviewing that for you. We're going to take a break, and Newswatch will continue in a moment.
As America's first civilian in space, Christa McAuliffe was Challenger's most celebrated astronaut, but more important, she was part of a team.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
7 Americans were on board when the Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off from the Kennedy Space Center. The crew members included 3 trained pilots, a laser expert, the second woman to fly in space, a Hughes aircraft engineer, and Christa McAuliffe, the the woman who was to have been the first teacher in space. Challenger's pilot was 40-year-old Michael Smith. He flew missions in Vietnam and was awarded the Navy's Distinguished Flying Cross. He said flying was a dream he had since childhood.
You know, as far back as I can remember, all I ever wanted to do was fly. And when I was a young kid coming up, of course, the space program was just getting started, and my interest just naturally from the flying aspects went over to wanting to fly into space. And it's just something that I've wanted to do all my life. And I don't know how I got interested. I can't tell you. I just have always been interested in doing flying.
The flight was commanded by 46-year-old Francis Dick Scobee. The Challenger flight was going to be his second trip aboard the space shuttle. Scobee was a test pilot with the Air Force. He entered the space program in 1979, and he believed Christa McAuliffe would serve as an important role model for younger Americans.
The lasting part is going to be the idea that she puts in the head of both teachers and students to expect to be in space. In other words, their future, space is part of their future. They expect to live and work there. And if she can do that, she's doing a lot for mankind.
Mission Specialist Ellison Onizuka was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. He was a member of the crew of the Defense Department's first super-secret shuttle flight.
I think that there is a need for, what we did on our first mission, and I fully believe that it's something that this country needed, the rest of the free world needed it.
Dr. Judy Resnik was a biomedical engineer before joining the space program in 1978. She said Christa McAuliffe became a part of the team, even though she was not a trained astronaut.
She knows where we're going to be standing, how busy it's going to be, where she can help, where we need our space, and she has learned an awful lot and become a team member.
Payload specialist Gregory Jarvis was an electrical engineer who joined the program only 2 years ago. He talked about the space vehicle.
Well, it's been very satisfying because you are close to the space. You don't get to do the ultimate trip, but you're close enough to the program that you really feel like you're contributing, and you bring your friends in to see the spacecraft, and they look at it, and you say, gee, I wonder, maybe it is something special, because I spent all my life around it, so it becomes very mundane to me.
Finally, 36-year-old mission specialist Ronald McNair was a physicist. He became an astronaut in 1978 following work at the Hughes Research Laboratories. McNair planned to track Halley's Comet during the Challenger mission.
Probably everything we know about it we're going to learn during this trip. We're going to learn something about some of the gases and elements that the comet are composed of. What does that tell us? Well, that comet exists now the way it did at the creation, origin of the universe.
McNair was the second black astronaut to fly in space. Ron Israel, CNN.
Joining Newswatch now from the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Frank SELTZER. Frank, what's the mood there?
Lou, the mood right now is one of shock and disbelief. It is still calm here. I am in Building 9A. This is the area where most of the NASA astronauts get their training. Behind me, you see a full-size mock-up of the space shuttle. This is where training would go on. Normally, there would have been some training activities still going on at this hour. The building is quiet, save for a few other reporters here. Basically, NASA has been staying around TV sets, watching, trying to find out. Most of the people here are not involved in the day-to-day, minute-to-minute decisions as to what goes on. They are the support people who help out, the trainers, bookkeepers, everything else is here. And they, like us, are trying to find out exactly what happened to their friends who were on board Challenger.
Frank, I've been in Building 9A, and usually the astronauts come over when we request them to come over as part of our continuing coverage of this or any shuttle mission. Are the astronauts staying pretty much to themselves today?
Yeah, right now, most of them are. This is a tough blow. It happened once before, as you know, with Apollo 1 about 19 years ago. But for this one, this was, going up, it looked good, and then it happened. And for a lot of people, it's just a very tough time. There's silence here. As you know, this is usually a fairly lively place. The entire complex is here in Houston. People are around. They're friendly. They're talking. Today, they're not. It's very withdrawn. They're going through some introspection, trying to figure out, what happened. They haven't gotten to the mourning stage yet because the shock hasn't worn off. A few people around here were just really in a daze. They were walking around. I asked how they were doing, and they said, well, right now I'm hanging in there, but later on, don't ask me, because once I get out of here, it'll probably really sink in. And I think that's what's going on. It's a very, very eerie feeling right now. But the one thing that does strike me about here, a few other people that I have talked with, President Reagan alluded to it in his address about 25 minutes ago, where he said these were test pilots, people who knew the risks of space exploration. And that is a fact. Several of the astronauts had said, we are, in effect, test pilots. We know the dangers. Sometimes people die in these type things. It happens. They don't like it, but it happens, and they're aware of the risks here.
All right, Frank Seltzer at the Johnson Space Center, now to Mary Alice Williams in New York.
You know, the manned space program had finally reached a new goal. The test pilots who led the way had cleared the way for civilians, just people who could learn and teach us and our children about the miracles of space flight and the necessity for space exploration. What better choice than a teacher?
It was supposed to be the ultimate field trip. Third graders from Christa McAuliffe's Concord, New Hampshire hometown bound for Cape Canaveral and the blast-off of a spaceship.
Well, I think it's really neat because she's going to be the first private citizen in space.
It's going to be very exciting watching it go up. I'm used to seeing Mrs. McAuliffe out raking her yard or something, not floating around in space.
Expectations also ran high in New Jersey as a gifted group of science students prepared to simulate the shuttle launch. Ever optimistic, the interrupted countdown of America's 25th shuttle expedition would finally be a go. Now school officials prepare to grapple with NASA's worst nightmare.
Once they had seen the evidence on the visual screen that there would be no survivors, it suddenly became apparent to them that they were dealing with death.
From a Soviet official in Washington, condolences and expressions of sympathy for the crew members' families.
We regret loss of lives of the crew, and we express deep sympathy to the relatives and friends of the perished astronauts.
In New York, producers and the studio crew of a Sesame Street program watched in horror as the spacecraft blew apart.
Because it's never happened before, I think possibly many people even involved.
The shocking spectacle was also seen in a city bar.
It's one of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen in my lifetime. I can't remember ever seeing anything like that, especially not with a NASA-related expedition. I'm appalled at it. I feel very bad for the families of those involved.
In a moment of mourning, one New Yorker paused to put the nation's loss into perspective.
It's just a terrible pity, it really is. But again, it shouldn't stop our program because we've got to keep going. It's doing so much for us in other areas.
And from Dr. Robert Jastrow, one of NASA's founding fathers, conviction that manned space flights must forge ahead.
You've got to have men up there, the brain behind the eyeball, to fix these automated factories that we hope to put into space and make sure the product keeps flowing. It just is necessary to carry through this pioneering effort until it becomes routine.
We'll have more of our special edition of Newswatch in just a moment.